I'm taking a short break from my responses to the CES letters. I will continue with that next week. I've recently come across some videos. I believe the YouTube channel is Inspired Philosophy, I believe. I'll put a link to it in the description. But I wanted to make a response to this video. It is 10 reasons why the Bible, top 10 biblical problems for young earth creationism. So, they have 10 points. I will probably break this response to it up into a number of videos. Definitely no more than one per point, because they do make brief points. But I'll probably have 2 or 3 in each video. And so let's get to the video here.
If you haven't heard, there are millions of people today who believe the Earth is only about 6,000 years old. And about 4,000 years ago, there was a worldwide flood that destroyed all life on land, except for a few people and 2 of every animal that survived in an ark. The basis of this theory comes from many who say we ought to take a literal or plain reading of the Bible, the holy book of Christianity. The rationale behind this young earth view is that they are just taking the plain reading of the text, and that Christians who believe the earth is old have to misconstrue or reinterpret passages to make the Bible fit with an ancient earth and the theory of evolution. But what many young earth creationists don't realize is that there are several passages within the Bible itself that create problems for the young earth theory. Meaning, if we took the plain reading of the text in many places, it would actually contradict the view that the earth and the universe are only about 6,000 years old. These are the top 10 biblical passages that create problems for the young earth theory. Number 10, Genesis 17:17. Genesis.
Before we get into the actual points, I am one of those guys that believes in what is called the young earth creation. I take the timeline as given in the Bible for the history of the earth to be a literal timeline. And this is a belief that is held by the leadership of my faith, being the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and by many of the members. Now, we do take a slightly different view of it than most other Christians, which I will touch on as the video goes. So I will respond to this from the point of view of the young earth creation. However, I will also just point out that this is not my first time watching this video. So my responses are not impromptu, they are already well considered out, but I wanted to show the video and then my response to it so that you could see what my reasoning was and why I was responding how I was. So anyways, let us continue with his top 10.
In the universe are only about 6,000 years old. These are the top 10 biblical passages that create problems for the young earth theory. Number 10, Genesis 17:17. Genesis recounts the story of Abraham and Sarah, who were old in age and had no children of their own. God appears to Abraham and says he will have a son in his old age, and then in Genesis 17 it reads, "Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said to himself, 'Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?'" So Abraham thinks it's biologically impossible for someone past the age of 100 to have a child. But this seems...
Just a quick note on this. I'm no Hebrew scholar, but in the scriptures that are published by our faith, they do have in the footnotes, it says that the word laughed in this particular verse in the Hebrew also means rejoiced, meaning that he's not necessarily saying, the idea that Abraham thinks it's biologically impossible is not necessarily true given the text, even even with the word laughed, it's not necessarily that he thinks it's impossible, it's just that it is unlikely. And so he is laughing or rejoicing that he is being promised this great gift, even though he is old and it is unlikely for that to happen. So impossible versus improbable. And I think that he has an issue here when he says that he thinks it's impossible. But anyways.
To contradict the ages of his ancestors, also known as the early patriarchs, who were supposed to live for hundreds of years and have children in their old ages. According to the Masoretic dates, many of Abraham's ancestors were supposed to be alive when God made this promise to Abraham in his 100th year, and his ancestor Eber supposedly outlived him. So shouldn't Abraham's reply to God have been that many people alive are having children in their old ages? So having a child at the age of 100 is perfectly normal. More importantly is the fact...
Okay, first of all, we can't compare the people after the flood to the people before the flood. It is clear from the biblical account that the people before the flood lived a different life. They lived 900 years. Most of them lived over 900 years. I believe there was 2 that lived under 900. So given this extended lifespan, it would be logical that the childbearing years would also be extended. But after the flood, almost immediately, the lifespan is cut almost in half. It goes from 900 to about 450 after the flood. And then after Eber, as mentioned, he shows 3 people who outlived, who were alive at the time. Eber did outlive Abraham. But that's only 3 generations after the flood that it is at 400 years. After Eber, it drops down to about 200. So it's again cut in half. Each time the lifespan of the human race is reduced, logically, the number of childbearing years is also reduced. As our bodies age, we lose the ability to have children. The faster we age, the faster we lose that ability. So you can't compare people who are living 900 years, naturally, to those who are only living 150 to 200. It's not an accurate comparison.
The fact that based on what Genesis 12 says, Abraham's own father Terah would have had to have fathered Abraham at his own age of 130. So shouldn't Abraham's reply to God have been that having a child past the age of 100 is perfectly normal? After all, his own father had him when he was 130. The whole...
Okay. This is where we get to the point where we have a selective quoting that completely misrepresents the Bible. As you know, they say in chapter 12, it says that Abraham was 75 when he left Haran. And in chapter 11, I'll skip this back to the references here. This is where it's inaccurate. It doesn't actually quote it. It says Abraham was allegedly 75 when Terah died, and Terah died when he was 205. Okay, in chapter 11, verse 32, it does state that Terah lived to be 205. But in Genesis, in chapter 12, verse 4, it simply states that Abraham was 75 years old when he left the land of Haran. And so what they're saying here is that because chapter 12 comes after chapter 11, we have to assume that everything in chapter 12 happens after everything in chapter 11. But that's not the way the Bible's written. If we go back to chapter 11, verse 26, it states that Terah was 70 years old when he begat his 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So we know that Terah was no more than 70 when Abraham was born. And then it goes through, Terah moves with his family out of Ur, moves into the land of Haran, where he dies at the age of 205. But Abraham was 75 when he left Haran, which means that if Abraham was born when Terah was 70, then he left Haran when Terah was 145. Not that he left Haran after Terah died. And we see this same kind of thing when you look at the genealogies. You can see it. It says, you know, what is it? Terah's father, Nahor. Yeah, he died. Terah was born when his father was like 35. But the scriptures just say Nahor begat Terah when he was 35, and then Nahor lived so long, and then Nahor died. And then we go to Terah, and it says Terah was this old. And we see this in the genealogies, where we're given a kind of snapshot of one man's life. It tells you how old he was when when the next patriarch, his son, was born, and then tells you how old he was when he died. And then we go to the next one. And you can even see this. They acknowledge this whole thing in their little table here. Right here. In this table, you can see this. Shem, it was 2 years after the flood that Shem gave birth to Arphaxad. Arphaxad is 35 when he gives birth to Salah, and it goes down. And they even mark it in red here. Terah was 70 when he gave birth to Abraham, but then they move it over so that Terah was 130. They have it accurately put here, except that they want to move Abraham over so that it fits with their theory. The very table that they're showing proves them wrong, because the Bible says that Abram was born when Terah was 70. It actually doesn't. It says his 3 sons were, by the time Terah was 70, he had his 3 sons were born. That doesn't necessarily mean they were all born when he was 70. It doesn't necessarily mean they were triplets. It just means that by the time Terah was 70, his 3 sons had already been born. So if we look back, there is no generation after the flood that had children past the age of 100. We have no record of children being born past the age of 100 after the flood. So,
For a better understanding of the symbolic view of the ages of the patriarchs, see our video on Genesis 5. Number 9.
I'm actually going to stop this video here. I think this is taking long enough. I want to keep these as brief as possible. Some of the other ones won't be as long, but from this first example, we can see how they are. You know, he says young Earth creationists accuse others of. Well, I can't remember the word he uses now, but he accuses them of kind of misquoting the scriptures, whatever, in order to get it to fit the more ancient theories and the theory of evolution and all that. And he says, but they don't realize that the text of the Bible itself presents problems. Well, his first example, he misquotes the Bible. He reinvents the meaning of the Bible. He reinterprets it and ignores a direct passage in order to do so. So anyways, I'm going to leave that here, and I'll film the rest of them and release them in a moment.